Hello and welcome. I'm Omar Sallam, and this is the premiere episode of the Product Live. Join me as I speak to product management leaders and experts from all over the world, from top tech companies, startups, and esteemed organizations, where we go deep into the world of product management through profound discussions and sharing actionable advice from the brightest minds of the field. Whether you're commuting, hitting the gym, or seeking inspiration from the comfort of your home, the Product Live is your gateway to sharpening your product management expertise. Today, on the premiere episode of the Product Live, I'm welcoming a very special guest. He's an inspirational leader and speaker, and he has wide experience on product management. He's leading one of the best product-led tech companies in the Middle East, and this guest is Yi-Wei Ang, the Chief Product Officer of Talabat Delivery Hero Middle East. Welcome, Yi-Wei, and thank you so much for joining us today.
Excited to be here to share a little bit more about my journey here in product, and love to share a little bit about some of the learnings along the way also.
Yeah, I'm really happy about this. I've got the privilege to work with you for some time, and I know that you're a really inspiring leader and a speaker as well. But I think it's really important, to share the lessons that you've been learning across your journey, and how this could be useful for other people. So I would like to start and know, how did you start in product, and how did your career start in this industry?
It started in undergrad. So I did my undergrad in industrial engineering, not a very common engineering degree even today, with a focus of what we called human factors at the time. So that was a study of how humans interact with technologies. And it was right around the time when, the topic of web development and mobile development started to become really, really hot, about 10 or 15 years ago. And at that time, I actually really loved this field of user research. And my first job in the world of product development is actually as a UX researcher. And what was interesting was I was a UX researcher for a product that didn't really have a UI. So I was a user researcher for a company, IBM, as we know it, and for their database product. So my first foray into this was, basically studying how database administrators would do really long processes like backing up their databases or restoring the databases, which could take hours, if not days. And what the experience is like, and when things go wrong, what are the tools that they have to actually recover from that situation. And that really got me to learn about user pains and how technology plays a really significant role in actually making lives of people much easier. So how do you give users more confidence, when they're doing really big jobs like that things are actually going well and, they have nothing to sweat about, right? But as I sort of went down this user researcher role and practice, I started realizing that I loved research, but I loved even more designing solutions, and I loved even more driving that and seeing that through to completion. And I was like, yeah, but I'm sure there's a role that allows me to do that. And I didn't know what that was until I stumbled upon this role called product management. And remember, about 15 years ago, this role really wasn't a thing except for, some very, very big tech companies that had this practice, right? It was around the time that the associate PM role just became popular at Google, but not many companies had this concept of a product management role. So I was fortunate enough at the time to, through the new grad hiring process, stumble upon the product role at Microsoft. And Microsoft came to the campus and they were recruiting, and they, told me about this role called PM. And I was like, this is kind of what I'm looking for. And so, sort of freshly minted with an undergrad degree, I flew over to Seattle for a couple interviews and landed a new grad role as a PM. So I spent 2.5 years at Microsoft building products actually for, I would argue, one of the most opinionated set of users that you can find, which are software developers. So I was a PM for Microsoft's developer division. As you can imagine at the time, Microsoft has a big platform play. Windows Phone was still around and they were launching, and Windows 8 was launching at the time also, and they really wanted to build a platform of apps. And we know from the Apple Store story back in the days that it's really important to have all the apps around. And so my job was to build the ecosystem of developer tools and makes it even easier for developers to build their apps. So I had to be put in a PM role, got to be very technical, got to learn, what it's like building apps and launching apps. And so I spent, about 2.5, 3 years at Microsoft and really got to learn from sort of the best big tech companies what that was like. Being a new grad and going through that experience was really quite valuable. Then I moved to Singapore after that to work at the first startup. So I went from a really big tech company, Microsoft, to a much smaller startup. So I joined a 70-person startup called TradeGecko, where I was one of the first PMs in the company. And what that was an amazing experience for was I got to see that, the biggest differences between working in a big company where you have 100,000 employees, a vast majority of the team in Seattle were people working in the tech team and engineering teams, to a small startup of 70 people and having a development team of 15, and seeing how building product in that context is so much different. And as a PM, you also have to operate super differently, right? But I really got to enjoy the degrees of freedom I had in a smaller company. I got to then take on more and more and more, almost on a quarterly basis, right? First, I was the PM of the onboarding team. We were a B2B SaaS product, so self-service onboarding was super critical. And then I found, sort of capacity and time to do more things. So I took on the integration team. And then at some point they were like, you seem like you know what you're doing. Would you like to take on the growth team and the marketing team? And so I started taking that over and learning a lot about sort of growth loops and what it means to use the product to drive growth. And over a period of 3 years, I, stepped into the transition between from being an IC product manager to leading a team, first indirectly, and then as director of product eventually when I left, and having a team of people in product and in design, sorry, in product and in data also. So that was a really exciting transition. I moved then to Dubai about 5 years ago, and there I was VP of product at Property Finder when I first moved to Dubai. And we got to see through a much more sort of scale up business and how I ran product. And over the last 3.5 years, I've been at Talabat, and we are MENA's largest food delivery and quick commerce company. We have today about 480 people in product and engineering. And today I run the product management practice, the design practice, and the data science practice here at Talabat.
I would actually add to that that Talabat is definitely, if not the best, but one of the best tech companies in the Middle East and in the region. And also, it's one of the very few, very large tech companies in the Middle East that are actually product-led. And I've got the chance to see that firsthand, for the period of time that I worked with you. And yeah, it takes someone special and special leadership, or whether it's you and the rest of the leaders, to be able to apply that and apply such transition. So like from here, I just want to like recognize that for you. It was a great experience working on this.
And
It's
thank you so much.
Yeah, sure. It's a great overview that you gave us on your career journey. And there are a couple of points, that I would really like to zoom into a little bit. Like you mentioned that in the first couple of years, you were actually working on different kinds of products that you didn't really know how to manage when you first joined, or you didn't really have an idea. Started by something that is like a backend or something that doesn't have a user interface, and going through different kind of things that you're assigned for. So and I actually relate to that because I found myself in that position also a couple of times. I think it helps you a lot being a generalist PM, but like actively and more actionably, like what did you do to make sure that you are getting up to speed as much as possible with the new scopes that you were starting with, given that you didn't really know anything about them before?
What's exciting is I've been a PM across all sorts of different products, from database products to developer tools to B2B SaaS to being in a real estate portal to food delivery or very consumer products. So I've done the entire spectrum of different kinds of products. And people used to ask me like, yeah, but you haven't done consumer before. Are you sure you can? The interesting thing and my biggest learning across all of this is that I think that what product people bring to the table is not necessarily, oh, I've done consumer product for the last 15 years and I should continue doing consumer product the last 15 years. I actually think what we bring to the table is an ability to combine user needs and really understanding user problems and getting to the real meat of what the problems are, understanding what technologies there are that exist that can solve it, and in what experience we should solve it in. Kind of a bit of a no-brainer. We talk about this a lot, but I think that if I look at what's common across all of my different roles, is that it never deviated from like really having to understand the business goals, really having to really understand the consumer goals and the user goals, and figuring out a product experience that really moved both of those two things forward, right? So given that, when I onboard and I start a new role, whether it's in food delivery or whether it's in real estate, what I spend a lot of time is I don't look at the product too deeply yet. What I try and dig deeper into is the business. What are the key business goals? Where are we struggling? Where are we winning? What strengths do we need to play to? And once you really kind of understand and can start to shape a bit about where the business is headed, that's when you can try and then apply the product thinking to figure out what product you should build, what capabilities you should build in order to move those business and user goals forward. Right. So I spent also a lot of time with users. When I first onboarded to Talabat, I made it a point to schedule at least 2 calls with users every week across all of our different markets, right? Whether, a customer in Egypt, a customer in Kuwait. And I would call them. We were arranged, of course, on Zoom. And I would say, tell me about your last order in Talabat. I like to know, like, are you ordering food? Are you ordering groceries? Was it for, lunch at work, or was it for a big family party? Is this something that you wanted to cook? And the reason why I do that is I ask very big open-ended questions to really get into the minds and the psyche of our customers. And through that, I get to understand how people make decisions. I get to understand what pain points exist, and I get to understand a little bit about, some of the more basic and fundamental things that we need to improve on in order to make the lives of our customers better. So I find that to be one of the most powerful ways that product leaders can onboard and get deeper into an area, an industry perhaps that they're not as familiar with.
Yeah, it's great that you also are coming from a research background and you were able to apply the importance of research in building the organization that you're leading. I think especially across the Middle East and usually around startups and so on, especially when very very first stages, sometimes research is not given the real the true value and the true focus and support it needs to really understand users and validate assumptions and hypotheses and so on.
And I think that research as a discipline is so powerful,
Yeah.
but I think what's even more powerful is if all of us, regardless if you're a product manager, an engineer, or designer, took 10% and 20% of those skill sets, put it in your toolkit, and use it on a day-to-day. So I don't think that, just because I had a research background, I could do this. I think one of the more powerful things is if PMs and designers actually sort of do this on a day-to-day to really build a customer empathy in everything that they do.
Yeah, I actually would also say that that should extend also to engineering teams. Product and tech should always be coupled together, trying to look into problems and getting closer to users and so on. So it's not only for designers, product managers, or researchers, but also engineering teams should be encouraged to do that.
Yes, I don't know if you remember this, but at some point, especially when I first joined Talabat, I used to have not a rule, but I used to stop people in the hallway and ask them a question. And I said, when
Yeah,
was the last time that you spoke to a customer? And the
yeah,
expectation is that you would reply, oh, less than 30 days ago. And I think that should be, across all the different disciplines. I believe that, when people from different disciplines talk to users, they come in with also a different lens, right? You empathize with the same users and what they, what troubles they have, but perhaps an engineer is thinking about what are the performance requirements that we need if people need a split-second decision on topic X. A designer might be thinking about okay, like here's how the interaction should be in order to really map to the mental model of how a user thinks about things. So I think as different disciplines talk to users, they also get to really put it in their own lens. And if there's one point of commonality that brings the entire cross-functional team together, it's really
yeah.
putting that user at the heart of the decisions that they're making.
Yeah, definitely. Especially also, like it's definitely important in any scope and any size of company or product. But I remember also that that was really important since Talabat is serving, different countries, different cultures, backgrounds, and different geographies. And it was really important to understand, the differences of what users needs and how operations are working and so on in different countries. Yeah, so I would like also to touch on another point that you explicitly mentioned about when you started shifting a little bit more into leadership roles, and you were turning from an individual contributor and started like having management, responsibilities and so on. So, how was that transition to you, and how were you able to prepare yourself and elevate your skill set somehow? To start fitting into that track.
Yeah, I think I stumbled into it to some degree. I think when you're in a startup, it's not as structured as if you were to move from an IC track to a management track in a bigger company.
Yeah.
In Talabat today, for example, we have a very structured way to say, hey, as you become a senior PM, you sort of have options to open up. You can go in the IC track and be a principal, or you can consider a path where you become a lead PM and sort of grow in that management track. And in retrospect, if I were in a big company, I think that would have been much better in a sense where I think people in big companies get to explore the two a little bit. And when I worked at Microsoft, people would go in from management track to IC track and back to management track, and there was a lot of sort of ability for you to move quite laterally. If you realize that, for example, the management track is not for you, and that you have no sort of downside in shifting from a management track back to an IC track. In my specific case, I was in a startup. We were very fast growing, and I was at that point somewhat the most experienced PM in the room, and I started sort of exploring the joy I had in a couple things. So I started teaching product also in Singapore. So when I was working at TradeGecko, I also started teaching product in General Assembly. And I started finding a love for sort of teaching product, coaching teams, and I realized, you know what? It's very fulfilling and satisfying to see people grow in product. And that propelled me to say, hey, I think the move to becoming a product leader is might be the right fit for me. So thankfully, I had support of my CEO at the time, who said, look, why don't you jump into it and see how it goes. And since then, I've been on this journey on product leadership. I've learned a lot, made many mistakes as I first jumped into people management. It really is a very, very different job. Um, and here I am now, really firmly in this sort of PM management track.
What would you say was your biggest mistake, or like, the most spectacular one jumping into management?
I think this happens to a lot of people that when they first move as an IC to manage the management track, they've only known how to operate as an IC, right? You know that what you bring to the table is the product decisions that you make. What you bring to the table is that you're able to, if you're a designer, design better than everyone else. You know your hard skills, but the transition between, oh, well, do I just sort of do it for you, or do I coach you through this, or do I, give you full empowerment and you figure it out yourself and make mistakes? I think that balance and figuring out what style of management to apply when, I had no idea how to do. Right. But I think I'm fortunate enough to have worked with some very forgiving product people in my early on in my PM journey and my PM leadership
Mhm.
journey. And my first ever direct report actually still is currently working at Talabat also. So I guess I didn't screw up too badly. So there's a bit of that.
Okay, yeah, apparently that worked out for you.
Yes, yes, yes.
Um, okay, so like from what I understand from what you said, like there was a lot of like mentorship and coaching for how you could develop as a better management and product. But like what would you say like the main skills or the biggest skills that you have to acquire to go into management a little bit more, being
So
on more
first,
specific skills?
what's non-negotiable? You have to be a really darn good product person. No debate about that, right? I think too many people believe that, oh, well, if you're a people person and you like people and people like working with you, that's foundationally good enough for you to be a people manager. I actually think quite the opposite. I think the same way that, you would never trust, I don't know, a sports coach who's never played the sport before, isn't reasonably good at the sport, or has a reasonable eye for the sport to teach. I would also say that's true for people management. I think you have to be skilled in your craft, but two, you have to really, really find joy in coaching others. You really need to find joy in seeing others succeed. And I would say that's not a given for everyone. That's completely okay. It's completely okay. I think a lot of times, I feel like a lot of people were forced and accidentally stumble into people management without liking it. But thankfully, now a lot of the bigger companies have a deep appreciation of ICPMs, especially at the senior levels, contributing and driving some very big topics. I think that's a very viable path for a lot of people also. So anyway, I think that you have to be really skilled at your craft. I think you have to have a love and passion for really grooming and coaching people. And maybe the last one is you need to have really deep empathy. We have an org. I have an org now of about 130 people. And that also means, I'm managing different disciplines, different personalities, different level of seniority. Uh, and when you get to this size, like people going through different phases of life and going through all sorts of different things. So having empathy and really helping people through not just things at work, but figuring out how work and life come together, I think is a very important skill set.
Yeah, I think the way you explain it, especially about the empathy part, I think a part of it that you start having a new kind of product that you never dealt with, which is your product team. That's actually your product now as a product leader and as a product manager, and you're responsible for the way it performs and the outputs it's producing, which is, the physical product that they're working on, and also how it's developing, how it's scaling, and all of that. So like all the terminologies and the product development life cycle and all of that could be applied on yet another thing that is different from an actual digital product like we used to.
100%. 100%. And it's the same amount of care that you have to put in, in the product decisions that you make, you also have to now do on people decisions that you make in your role.
Amazing, amazing. And also picking one of the like main skills that you referred to, which is about coaching teams. And the higher you start getting in the management track, so you're not just coaching and mentoring other ICs that you're leading, but you start coaching and mentoring other managers that are leading other ICs and managers and so on. So you start coaching coaches somehow. And that's another level in the growth of your career overall. And what was your experience with that, and how do you manage and grow to be able to do that as well?
Yeah, managing senior leaders is a very different ballgame. Very different ballgame, right? When you start managing very senior people, you have to expect that whoever you hire is at their A game, that they have to be really, really skilled at what they do, and that you almost need to be there as a way to, you need to be present to help them refine their thinking, but you need to fully expect that they can drive and they can think through, big, hairy problems themselves, and they can really own large swaths of very ambiguous problems and see them through end to end. And I would say that the biggest transition I saw, when I moved from sort of managing ICs to managing managers was you really need to figure out, the default is to give a lot of space for your managers to operate and for them to make their decisions, and whether it's positive or negative or mistakes. But also recognizing that as in my case, a CPO of a very large business, my job is to make sure that the right decisions are also made that serves the business and serves our customers. And my job is to spot inconsistencies. My job is to spot misalignments in resource allocation. My job is to help refine thinking in my product leaders, to be their thought partner if they want someone to spar with. And my job is to really make sure that the work of the entire org becomes super, super well oiled and aligned. It is a very different job, but fulfilling in a very different way, because I get to see, the growth of people who are passionate about people leadership, and them going through the journey, as I went through on my own and realizing that I made some mistakes along the way, I think people management is definitely a journey, and being able to see and coach through, a bunch of new or even new and seasoned people managers through this has been a really fulfilling experience for me.
That's yeah, that's a great answer actually. And I wanted also to because you started explaining that there is a lot of things that are more business related that you have to balance, budgets and timelines and things like this that would guide that. But I have a very specific like question related to the product craft itself. Like the higher that you get in levels and you get more exposed to budgeting and regulations and specific timelines for things that needs to happen for market acquisitions, for example, or things like that. How to make sure that this doesn't like impacts the balance between the business objectives, but still doing the craft correctly, like giving the right time and resources for research and discovery and design and all of that to end up, with an actually very good product that achieves the business targets anyways. But
Yeah,
sometimes, in
it's
some
super difficult.
organizations,
It's super
yeah.
difficult. I mean, myself, I think I spend more time on Excel and PowerPoint than I do on, whatever the new tools are, whether it's Miro or Figma or whatever it is. My team always jokes that I still do, my occasional mockups in Balsamic, and I never caught on to all these new tools that are available now. And I'm completely okay with that, because I think that what I bring to the table is, decision making. What I bring to the table is really challenging teams on the way that they are breaking down problems, and metrics, and making sure we're progressing well. And I think the craft, I think there's an expectation when you get to a level of seniority that you sort at your craft. You know how to do discovery, you know how to look at metrics, you know how to do an MVP, you know how to, work very closely with the commercial teams to think about commercial model. Like all of that needs to be more or less squared away, right? And I think where I'm now pushing myself, and the part of the craft that I'm really growing and trying to grow in and build a stronger muscle in is actually much closer to the commercial side of the business, much closer to the business side of things. Because at the end of the day, when you get to more of a management role, your job is to be a business leader first, to really identify what are the biggest opportunities as a company you should take on before you take on, and think about your function and your role as a functional leader.
Yeah, it's obvious that as it's always said, and I think Marty Kagan said that in one of his books, like you actually hire smart people and you should let them do their jobs, and they are expected to be able to handle these kind of things related to the craft. But I also think that from the other side, they have to be, of course, empowered enough by leadership and by the overall org, right? And here comes the part where being empowered correlates to being in an organization that is product led, or at least recognizes the impact of product work, and allows for that. And as I said at the beginning, I've first-handedly saw how you were achieving that at Talabat when you first joined, and it's no secret that Talabat actually operates on the ground, and there's a lot of operations-driven functions inside of Talabat. And how were you able, like, I know we could speak about this for hours and hours, but like, what were your strategy? What were your mindset when you were trying to shift in whatever timeline, in a year and less and more, trying to shift the whole organization to have this kind of mindset, migrating and understanding that product is here for a reason, that's the impact of product, and slowly shifting into being product led?
I think the most important thing, and a lot of mistakes that I see product people and design people making, is they have a very theoretical and romantic notion of how products should be built. And when you come into an
Yeah.
organization, your organization say, oh, we must now practice dual track agile, and now we will do discovery, and then now we will do delivery. And no, we will
Mm-hmm.
not discuss timelines. And I feel when you come in as a leader to an organization that may not be super mature on a product spectrum, and you start with that and saying, oh no, we have our product way of doing things,
Yeah.
I think it actually alienates people. It makes product sound like, arguably divas in some cases, right?
Yeah.
And the way that we've done things and turned it around is to say, let's park that aside. Park philosophy and how we should build, park that aside for a second. Let's really understand what the business needs. Let's really understand for our different stakeholders, for the different parts of the business, like what if we believe that product is a multiplier, and that's our role, right? We're here to make the lives of our marketing counterparts easier, our logistics counterparts easier, our grocery commercial team counterparts easier. What is it that is really getting in the way of them delivering both customer and business value? And when you focus on that and focusing on saying, okay, cool, what is the smallest thing that I can do to really show that that business value can be achieved? Do that, right? So don't bother about, the way I like to say it is show, don't tell. You don't have to
Yeah.
tell people about all your romantic, books that you love about product. Instead,
Mm.
show them that you're able to deliver really good value and everything else should follow.
Awesome. Yeah. And showing them, and you start, by showing them, you start gaining more trust and more, ground, whether in front of leadership in your organization or whether with other stakeholders. And that, I think, is how, like, true empowerment is it's not given to you. You have to work for it, and you have to show that you deserve it, whether you're in individual product teams or as a product org, as a whole. There is also something that we could talk about, different product teams here, which you spoke about 2 times before, and I've actually never heard anyone speak about this perspective before. It's really unique that you talked about that, which is building courageous team and courage in product management and product leadership in general. So we definitely need to hear more about that from you.
So this all started earlier this year when I started digging into what kind of product organization I wanted to build. And I started digging into and researching and really thinking about the best product organizations I respect and what is it that I respect about them? How do they operate? And what you realize is that the best product organizations are the ones that can really, consistently innovate and try big things and not afraid to fail and are able to jump headfirst, into some really big, hairy problems, even when everyone tells you don't do that. And I started asking myself, like, why is it so hard? Like, why is it that, we all know that to be true, right? Like product people who've been in the craft long enough, we've read enough about very successful companies. They're like, yeah, we align to that. We want to build that. But why is it so hard? Then I started enumerating all the different things of why it's so hard, right? And the moments in a product manager's life where things feel really hard, when you have an experiment that didn't go well and need to explain to your management team why the experiment didn't go well, or to be able to go to your team and say, hey guys, like I think this is a pretty no-brainer. Let's not waste time, testing this to the nth degree and let's just go. To being able to say, guys, I think that what we're about to do is super short term and we should have the guts to do what's right in the long term. And I think in a PM's role, given that our world is so ambiguous and arguably open-ended when we can build anything as sort of tech people, I think the hardest thing to do is to be able to manage such ambiguous situations with a level of courage that you say, you know what, I'm going to be able to do this. And courage is not about putting on a brave face and saying, let's fight this fight. Quite the opposite. I think courageous teams go deeper, and courageous teams actually embrace their vulnerability. The teams that are the most courageous are also the most vulnerable, because through vulnerability, and when you really bring your whole self to the situation, say, like, I really don't know if I should be going on this path, or, I really don't know if I should do this or that. You bring your true self into the room, and then you will be able to find allies in the room, your team and people around you, to be able to crack this together. I think the best teams are the ones where they can truly, share their fears and hopes together and tackle big problems together. So, I started exploring this concept of courage and courageous product organizations, and how the underlying theme of, them being vulnerable together is a very powerful common thread. For anyone interested, I didn't make a lot of this up myself. Brene Brown's content, whether on Netflix or her book Dare to Lead, covers a lot of this, and it's what really got me started on how powerful it would be and how amazing it would be to work in a product organization or a company that truly appreciates and encourages and celebrates courageous decision making, courageous leadership.
I think it's still, even if it was like, mentioned in other resources or other people talked about it, but I think you bring really a fresh perspective to it. And that's why I wanted to ask you about it. But I also wanted to ask, like, with courage, you were saying being courage to take decisions or to try something new or to experiment and so on, and being vulnerable to that. But there has to be also some sort of, like, calculated risk if we're talking about actually applying this kind of courage. So there is a lot of, like, the concept of being open to any things, and these are things that we could apply as people. But if we start taking that into the actual product and the actual customer to try to understand more or experiment a little bit more or try new things that may or may not work, different line of business, different new products and so on, how to make sure that we are moving within a calculated risk, within a contained, area of
And
safety or some
that's where a
threshold.
lot of the practices like continuous discovery and dual track agile really start to show its life and its value, right? If you're constantly doing discovery, you're constantly learning, you're constantly de-risking along the way. You don't have a big discovery 6 weeks to de-risk a project. You're just constantly doing it. And I think that's, courageous courageous teams that can learn together and can build together are also the teams that discover together, are the teams that go to customers together, are teams that are constantly experimenting every week to figure out whether they should be building product A or product B. I think that's part and parcel of building the product organization that has the courageous DNA also.
Definitely. And the way to, like, actually lead this and push the teams more towards this is having more courageous leaders as well. And I think there are two levels to this, inspired from what you mentioned. I'm not inventing something new, but there is the level of, like, being courageous on the business level and the leadership level, but also being personally courageous in front of the teams that you're leading, like admitting that there is something that you don't really know right now, but we should work together to know, and or admitting that there is something as a leader that you're not really sure of, but maybe one of your reportees has more experience in that, or they are more close to the customer and they should be, pushed to take these decisions, or that you did a mistake, or like something didn't work out and so on, as a person and as a leader in that position, not
So
just,
I agree. And that's why three words are very interlinked. So we talked about the relationship between courage and vulnerability. I will also then throw in a third word of authenticity, and how if you're constantly having to put on a brave face in front of your team day in and day out, it also means that you can't truly be authentic and real in front of your entire team. And I think that one of the most powerful things that a leader can do is to be authentic and real. One, because the team will appreciate it a lot more. But number two, it's incredibly tiring as a leader to have to play two personas, one in the private world and one, where you have your public persona. So I actually find that as a leader, to be authentic and to really bring your whole self and true self to work is just a much easier place to be. And I think that better results will come out of that.
That's definitely great and actionable advice, actually. Very, very specific. Thank you for that. And like, one final thing that I would really like to close with, like, with your position now and everything that you have achieved and everything also that you have learned and teach to different teams, like, what would be a word to your young self just right after landing your first product role?
I think when I first started my role in products, I felt like I only had one goal, which was just to move up the ranks of product as quickly as I could. And 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 I think if I were to do everything in retrospect, I would advise myself to say, look, the road to your career is very long. And I mean, it's not to say don't be ambitious and don't push yourself hard. Absolutely do that. And I never stopped doing that. But learn to just enjoy the journey along the way. Enjoy the mistakes you make along the way. Enjoy the learnings along the way. Because it's much easier to really soak in learnings and build that breadth when you first start your career than later on in your career. And so if I had one advice for myself, if you ever to start all over again, is take the time, really go deep, really learn. You know, if there's analysis to be done, go deep and really, you know, be proud of everything that you do. But go into do a little bit of design, do a little bit of data, talk to your customers a lot, figure out think about strategy and think about, you know, the 3-year horizon, think about the 1-year horizon, think about the quarterly horizon. Really be curious about everything. Because it's through curiosity that really sparks the way that you can think and open up all the different possibilities you have about things that you can build and things that you can jump into in the future. So if I were to give a younger self an advice, is to take your time to really focus on learning and focus on breadth of experiences that you can have.
And maybe also within the same context, like one final piece of advice on how to deal with imposter syndrome, since it's a big part of starting in a product job.
Yeah, I think it's first recognizing that everyone has it. And when you recognize that everyone has it, you can work backwards from that to realize that it's not necessarily just about you. That everyone, to some degree, needs to really build the experience and the repetition to really fight that a little bit. But maybe one word of advice for anyone dealing with imposter syndrome is before, you know, first recognizing that everyone goes through it. But number 2, use it to do your best work. When I felt imposter syndrome, it pushed me to say, well, then my work better be freaking good. Because, you know, every presentation that I had, every conversation and decision meeting I had with my CEO, it had to be really good. Because, you know, and I would leverage the imposter syndrome and fear that I had to make sure that I was just doing really good work.
Well, that was the end of it. Thank you so much, Yi-Wei, for being here on the premiere episode of The Product Life. I'm really privileged that I'm starting this show with you, and I'm so happy that you shared all of these insights, lessons learned from your exceptional career. There is a lot for everyone to learn from this and from your experiences and actually turning organizations into truly being product-led. Thank you so much for being here, and for you, our viewers, thank you so much for tuning in the first and premiere episode of The Product Live. Please subscribe to the YouTube channel and also subscribe on Spotify and Apple Podcasts, and follow The Product Live on Instagram and LinkedIn to get all the updates about the upcoming episodes. And please share with us your feedback and what are the topics that you would like us to discuss in the future and in the upcoming episode. Again, thank you so much. I'm your host, Omar Sallam, and that was The Product Live.